It began not with a bang, but with a quiet, deliberate click. The sound of a phone being powered down, a small action, yet it carried the weight of a lifetime. I stood in the pre-dawn stillness, the air cool and heavy with unspoken words. The decision was made. I would walk away from the noise, from the tangled roots of a family that no longer felt like home. This was not an act of anger, but of survival, a deep instinctual need for silence, for a space vast enough to hear my own thoughts again. The world I knew was about to shrink to the size of my backpack. Leaving was a slow, methodical process. Each item I packed was a choice, a commitment to a new way of being, a worn compass, a thick woolen blanket, a map creased with 100 possible futures. I left no note. A note would have been an invitation for a reply, a continuation of the dialogue I so desperately needed to escape. The silence I was leaving behind was a paradox. It was the loudest thing in the house. It was a silence filled with expectation, with disappointment, with the ghosts of conversations that could never be resolved. My own silence would be different. It would be wild and untamed. As I closed the door for the final time, a profound sense of peace settled over me. It was the peace of inevitability. The city was still asleep, its concrete canyons bathed in the soft gray light of morning. Streetlights cast long, lonely shadows on the pavement. I did not look back. To look back would be to risk unraveling the fragile thread of my resolve. Each step I took was a movement away from a life that had been carefully constructed for me, and a step toward something utterly unknown. It was a pilgrimage into the heart of solitude, a journey I had to make alone. The final act was the most difficult. At the edge of the city, where the road met the wild, I took out my phone one last time. I did not turn it on. Instead, I removed the SIM card, a tiny piece of plastic that held my entire social existence. I placed it under a flat gray stone, a small secret burial. It was a symbolic severing of the final tie. Now, there was only the path ahead, the wind on my face, and the promise of a world that did not know my name. The weight on my shoulders was immense, but for the first time in a long time, it was a weight of my own choosing. My journey led me north, to the great, open steppe. Here, the world flattened into an endless expanse of grass and sky. The wind was a constant companion, a living entity that whispered secrets across the plains. It was a sound that was both ancient and new, a language without words. I walked for days, the horizon a shimmering, unbroken line. The sheer scale of the landscape was humbling. It made me feel incredibly small, a tiny speck of life moving through an immense breathing world. The loneliness I had anticipated felt different here. It was not an emptiness, but a presence. The grasses moved in unison, like a vast, green ocean. They swayed and bowed with every gust of wind, creating patterns that rippled toward the distant hills. I learned to read the land, to follow the subtle trails left by animals and the flow of unseen water. The sun was a powerful force, beating down with an intensity that bleached the colors of the day. But as evening approached, the light would soften, painting the sky in hues of orange, pink, and deep violet. In these moments, the steppe felt like a sacred place, a cathedral of open space. One afternoon, I sat on a low rise, watching a herd of wild horses. They were magnificent creatures, their coats shining in the sunlight. They moved with a grace and freedom that was mesmerizing. There was a stallion, a powerful leader, who stood watch as the others grazed peacefully. He would occasionally lift his head, his nostrils flaring as he tasted the wind, ever vigilant for danger. I felt no desire to get closer, to intrude on their world. It was enough to simply witness them, to be a silent observer of their untamed lives. Their presence was a reminder of a world that existed long before us. At night, the sky became a spectacle of impossible beauty. With no city lights to dim their brilliance, the stars were overwhelming. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of diamonds. I would lie on my back, wrapped in my blanket, and feel as though I could fall upward into the cosmos. The silence was absolute, broken only by the chirping of crickets or the distant cry of a night bird. It was in this profound quiet that I began to find the peace I had been searching for. The noise of my past was finally beginning to fade. From the steppe I moved higher, into the foothills of a great mountain range. The terrain became more rugged, the air thinner and cooler. The open plains gave way to dense forests of pine and birch. It was here, in this new kingdom, that I first encountered the elk. I heard them before I saw them. A strange, ethereal bugle echoed through the trees, a sound that was both haunting and beautiful. It was a call that resonated deep within me, a sound of pure, unadulterated wildness. I followed the sound, moving slowly and carefully through the undergrowth. I found them in a clearing, a large herd grazing by the edge of a mountain meadow. The bull was a majestic sight. His antlers were enormous, a crown of bone that spoke of age and power. He stood proudly, his breath misting in the cool morning air. The females and their young moved around him with a quiet confidence. They were perfectly adapted to this environment, their thick coats blending with the colors of the forest. I watched them for hours, hidden behind a cluster of ancient pines, feeling like an intruder in a secret world. The forest itself was a world of details. Moss grew thick on the north side of trees, a natural compass. Mushrooms of vibrant colors sprouted from the damp earth. The ground was a soft carpet of fallen pine needles, muffling my footsteps. The air was rich with the scent of damp soil and resin. Sunlight filtered through the high canopy, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor. It was a place of deep tranquility, a world teeming with life in every nook and cranny. I felt a sense of belonging here, a connection to the cycles of growth and decay. One evening, as dusk settled over the forest, I witnessed a moment of quiet drama. Two young bulls engaged in a playful sparring match. They locked antlers, pushing and shoving, testing each other's strength. It was not a serious fight, but a rehearsal for future battles. The rest of the herd paid them little mind, continuing to graze as the light faded. It was a simple, yet profound display of natural behavior. In their world, everything had a purpose, a rhythm. I was merely a visitor, granted a brief glimpse into their ancient and ordered lives. My path eventually led me down from the high forests to a wide, meandering river. The water was a ribbon of silver, flowing through a valley carved over millennia. Its song was a constant, soothing murmur, a sound of perpetual motion. The river was the lifeblood of this landscape. Its banks were lush with willows and cottonwoods, their leaves shimmering in the breeze. Birds darted through the air, their calls a cheerful counterpoint to the river's deep hum. I decided to follow its course, to let it guide me on the next stage of my journey. I made my camp near the water's edge, on a soft patch of sandy ground. The river provided everything I needed. Its water was cold and clear, perfect for drinking. It was also a source of food. I watched patiently as trout darted in the shallows, their bodies flashing in the sunlight. Learning to catch them with a simple line was a lesson in patience and observation. Each fish I caught was a gift, a moment of connection to the river's bounty. I felt a deep sense of gratitude for this simple, sustainable existence. The river was a place of encounters. One morning, I saw a family of otters playing near the opposite bank. They were sleek and joyful, sliding down a muddy slope into the water with gleeful chirps. They chased each other in elegant underwater ballets, their movements fluid and effortless. Their pure, uninhibited joy was infectious. It was a reminder that even in the wild, there is time for play, for simple delight in being alive. I sat for a long time, simply smiling as I watched them, my own troubles feeling very far away. As I followed the river, I noticed the history etched into its banks. Layers of sediment told stories of ancient floods and changing seasons. Smooth, rounded stones had been shaped by the water's relentless flow over countless years. The river was a historian, a keeper of time. It had been flowing long before I arrived and would continue to flow long after I was gone. Standing by its edge, feeling the cool water rush over my feet, I felt a connection to something eternal. I was a fleeting presence in its long, unending story. The river led me deeper into the mountains, to a land of rock and ice. The air grew colder, the landscape more stark and dramatic. Vast glaciers clung to the high peaks, their blue ice glowing with an inner light. This was a place of raw elemental power. The wind howled through the high passes, a lonely and mournful sound. It was a challenging environment, a place that demanded respect. I felt a sense of awe and trepidation as I ventured into this silent, frozen world. This was the domain of a creature I'd only dreamed of seeing. I was searching for the snow leopard, the ghost of the mountains. I had seen its tracks in the snow, large round prints that spoke of a powerful yet elusive animal. The local people whom I rarely encountered spoke of it in hushed, reverent tones. They said it was a spirit, a guardian of the high peaks. I spent days scanning the rocky ridges with my binoculars, my heart pounding with anticipation. The search required immense patience. It was a meditation, a process of becoming part of the landscape, of learning to see with new eyes. Then, one afternoon, I saw it. It was perched on a high ledge, almost perfectly camouflaged against the gray rock. Its thick, smoky gray coat was covered in dark rosettes. Its long, thick tail was wrapped around its body for warmth. It was utterly still, the embodiment of mountain solitude. It turned its head, and for a breathtaking moment, its pale green eyes seemed to look directly at me. There was no fear in its gaze, only a calm, intelligent curiosity. It was a look that pierced right through me, a moment of profound connection with a truly wild being. The leopard held my gaze for what felt like an eternity, and then, with a fluid, silent movement, it was gone. It did not run, it simply blended back into the rock and disappeared. I was left breathless, my hands trembling. The encounter was a gift, a secret shared between me and the mountain. It was a confirmation of everything I had been seeking, a world that was vast, mysterious, and utterly indifferent to human concerns. The ghost of the mountains had shown itself to me, and I was forever changed. The loneliness I once felt was replaced by a sense of profound wonder. After weeks in the high, silent peaks, I began my descent. The air grew warmer, the landscape softer. I carried the silence of the mountains with me, a deep, internal quiet that felt unshakable. The journey had stripped me down to my essential self. I had faced solitude, and found not emptiness, but fullness. I had witnessed the raw beauty of the wild, and felt a part of it. I was not the same person who had walked away from the city months before. I felt stronger, clearer, and more at peace than I had ever been. As I neared the edges of civilization, I found a small, dusty outpost with a single telephone line. A strange impulse took hold of me. I had not thought of my old life for a long time, but now, a flicker of curiosity stirred. My old phone was still in my pack, its battery long dead. I found a place to charge it, a small generator humming in the back of a tiny shop. I was hesitant. Part of me wanted to leave it off forever, to remain in the silent world I had discovered. But another part, a deeper, older part, needed to know. I powered it on. The screen flickered to life, a small, jarring intrusion of the modern world. And then, the notifications began. They came in a flood, a torrent of digital messages that made the phone vibrate uncontrollably in my hand. One after another, they appeared on the screen. Voicemail, voicemail, voicemail. The number climbed rapidly. 10, 20, 30. It didn't stop. I stared in disbelief as the count continued to rise. 40, 41, 42, 43. 43 unheard messages. A lifetime of silence broken by a deluge. My finger hovered over the screen. A profound stillness settling over me. The wind from the open door carried the scent of dust and distant rain. The awe I had felt watching the snow leopard was now mixed with a new, more human emotion. It was not fear, but a deep, resonant curiosity. Each of those 43 messages was a voice from a world I had left behind, a story waiting to be heard. The journey into the wilderness was over. A different kind of journey, the one back to my own life, was about to begin, and it would start with a single word: play.